Good morning, everybody. The reason we've been jumping into this topic is almost a personal one. To begin with, we had talked a lot about hybrid warfare, and I will use this case to look at hybrid warfare or propaganda and ideology towards Europe, in both cases, Turkey's and in the case of the PKK. Secondly, the day before yesterday, no, exactly yesterday morning, Deutschlandfunk, a German broadcast, a very famous German broadcast, brought a program on a feature on Turkey and the PKK, where other than Jeffries, the former ambassador of the US to Turkey and Iraq, and General Citlolo, I was interviewed, which created a fierce reaction on pro-PKK circles on Twitter and so on. And yesterday afternoon, I've been writing suggestions of how to deal with that for the Lavak commander. So it's very apt to look at it. What I would like to do in a couple of minutes now is to go only to the development of the conflict as far as it is absolutely necessary to understand why things happened this way. To begin with, generally speaking, we saw recently that Turkish President Erdogan blocked Sweden's and Finland's NATO membership application, quoting allegations that both countries are harboring terrorists, meaning the PKK and other left-wing radical groups from Turkey. And this comes to a point of time when he got already a quasi-rehabilitation due to Turkish support of Ukraine, namely Turkish military support with the Bayraktar drones. The West, on the other hand, and sympathizers of the PKK's cause recognized the YPG's, the PKK in Syria's contribution in defeating ISIS, and made the point that you cannot treat an ally of the West this way. You should be more grateful. Neither position is entirely true, nor is it entirely wrong. What the Europeans are conveniently and stubbornly and for decades overlooking is the fact that both Turkey and the PKK are very much engaged in domestic European politics. And I know that I'm entering a minefield now, ignore it for political reasons, I would say. Let's just go very through Turkey's ideology and praxis in northern Syria. Turkey, we all know that within all these problems, the issue with the YPG was quoted, and this belongs to the Syrian setup of conflicts. I will not go into the genesis of this conflict. I will just make the very point that Turkey has a long-standing experience with working with irregular forces. It always had one. A very good one, a different one. Why? Because even the modern Turkish Republic goes back to the 19th centuries in Bulgaria, the Bashi Bozuk and so on. So this is a long-standing practice. We don't have to go into it. And they also know how to cooperate with Kurdish forces. Be it inside Turkey, the so-called Korucu, be it outside Turkey, where they do partner. In Syria, their preferred target was, of course, pan-Turkish groups, and there is only a very small amount of Turkomans possible, and Caucasians. That's mostly Chechens, and similar groups. However, the Ottoman heritage was always claimed, even before Erdogan, and Turkey always maintained a combination between cultural activities and intelligence. And I would say cultural activities are always part of hybrid warfare if you use them with a strategic guidance, whether you want to do something good or not, but they are belonging to it. Why? Because any cultural activity of any country reflects its ideology, whether they have an explicit ideology or an implicit one. So the implicit ideology of Europe is pacifism. Hence, military operations are not for power projections, full stop. But you don't say so. You say liberalism or something nice, so that you can stomach it or to make international relations work in your brain. However, fact is, Europeans do pacifism. Turkey does nation state, nationalism. And one part of it is the problem of the Kurdish issue, which is now much better, but started with denial of Kurds' existence. Why? Because it's a project to create Turks out of whoever is in Anatolia. The fact of the moderate Kurds, in this case it's the KDP, which are at the same time the arch enemies of the PKK. And Erdogan, and even in the 1990s, the Refah party managed to cultivate relationships which now came in handy with Sunni Arab groups, some of them very radical. And it's kind of a chicken and egg question. Have they been radical before? Have they been radical afterwards? But there's a clear focus on the Muslim Brotherhood system, and there's a clear focus on certain Sufi tariqas. A tariqa is, how should I say, like an order, and especially the Naqshbandi, who are traditionally spearheading political Islam in Turkey. And if you look at the alliances in northern Iraq with Turkey, you would see there's a lot of contradiction in it, but these contradictions vanish as soon as you put the Sufi layer over it, the Dervishes layer, and you would see Erdogan is a Naqshbandi Sufi, the Barzanis are Naqshbandis, and then certain interesting Arab groups too, which I don't go into detail now. In Syria, we should see that Turkey's policy towards Syria is actually the result of a failure. Ankara, or to better speak, Erdogan, wanted that Assad should liberalize the regime by allowing the very powerful Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan, into the fold, or and participate into power, especially in economy, because they're middle class based, they share the social background of the AKP party of Erdogan's. But if this wouldn't work, and as they saw that the Europeans and the Americans were behaving like replacing Assad, remember that a certain Guido Westerwelle, who now passed away for a few years ago, as German foreign minister, counseled coram publico the Syrian president to go to Sochi and for retirement. This was a very maladroit suggestion, because if you suggest an Arab dictator to retire and don't put 3 tank divisions on his borders, you've done an empty threat, but you change threat perceptions. And everyone was actually expecting that the West will seriously intervene, hence they jumped on the bandwagon. Turkey would never have agreed to the fall of Assad, not because they like him, but because they fear the consequences and feel kind of stuck now inside, because they counted on the Europeans and the Americans that Assad will fall through. What they also want to prevent is a strong and functioning Kurdish entity, which potentially could unify with northern Iraq. So the core enemy is Kurdish nationalism in the form of an independent nation state, and for the military and for the right wing in Turkey, a substantial Kurdish autonomy inside Turkey. The word autonomy, this must be underscored clearly, always in the Middle East always includes full control over intelligence and security. So that's a very, very important difference. Language rights come secondly, but this is about full control for security. And it took Turkey very long to go for an OSCE-based approach. It took also Kurdish groups very long, and Kurdish intellectuals very long, to go for an OSCE-like approach when it's about language and culture and so on. And a democratic form of autonomy, a cultural autonomy. And what Turkey wanted to achieve was also to diminish the role of Russia, but it was very quickly taught another lesson. And I think personally that they accepted to a certain degree the presence of Iran because they know the Iranians very well and they know how difficult it is to deal with them. So we are now in the plan B. Relations with Russia, the Islamic Republic and Syria have been ameliorated, and the main aim is to limit the YPG space of maneuver and to do a repatriation of refugees. Until now, only Erdogan has any plan what to do with Syrian refugees. No one else has. Erdogan would say 1 million in this and that area. We come to that point for sure. And of course, Ankara is dealing with problematic partners. We don't have to go into the symbols, the Liva Sultan Murad, the Harraka Nuruddin and so on. They're quite you would not like to have them in Europe. Well, they are here. Part of them came with the big refugee crisis. And this is the area we are talking about when it comes to ethnicity. These are the areas where you see orange in amber, the domination of the Kurdish ethnicity in Syria. Please notice that the ethnic groups go beyond the border. And this is also the region where the PKK, seeing itself as the sole representative of the Kurds, claim control. And I mentioned these two Sunni radical groups because they are stretching over the canton on Afrin, and Afrin is peculiar. It's not entirely Sunni. It's very strong Yazidi. It's very strong sectarian, and it's the only region with a real clear power base for the PKK. PKK has other power bases too, but Afrin is really deep. So using this, and when they marched in 2018 into Afrin, this was a logical step. We can here see the fears of Turkey, and here again, the different areas Turkey is interested in. Sorry. No. Yeah. In this area, we would have a semi-autonomous rule around Italy with the various fundamentalist groups, which are much now, where Turkey much tries to keep some kind of control, but it's very difficult to maintain this control. However, the Turks manage it. It would be a grave security loss for Europeans if Turkey loses here. And this is where Turkey added area. This is the area where Turkey always threatens to intervene. And here we have Syrian and PKK forces, and I will come to them in a minute. Again, this is not about the Syrian. We can go into details when there's questions, but let's go to the YPG. The YPG, the People's Defense Units, are of course part of the wider PKK family. The PKK family starts with a civilian and a military branch, which is replicated everywhere. It's a very complicated, full of abbreviations and groups and groupings organization. The official name is PKK any longer. It's KCK, which is the Union of Societies of Kurdistan. Kurdistan. Please, pardon me. Which is Union of Societies of Kurdistan. It owes very much to the left-wing tradition of Turkey. The organization started as one of these urban and communist guerrilla groups of the 1970s. It was tolerated by Syria in late 70s, but it was also tolerated by the Turkish Secret Service because the PKK wiped out the slate in southeastern Anatolia against other more stronger and more popular groups, and was one of the few armed communist groups that survived in great numbers, and it became the sole alternative for everyone who wanted to pick up a fight against Turkey. The Syrian interest is, of course, the operational area, that is southeastern Anatolia, that is where the water is. And one main interest of the Syrians was to prevent, to slow down Turkey's construction of dams and water barrages. So this is one of the reasons why they would support them. Beyond that, the PKK is anti-imperialist, communist. The relationship of the PKK to the KGB are debated. Slowly, information comes to the light. But it has inherited a very strong ethos of discipline. It's a very Stalinist organization. It looks with a myriad of societies, clubs, organizations, civil society groups, very democratic. But for this, we have to understand that the word Demokrat in the Turkish communist parlance simply means communist. It's like Deutsche Demokratische Republik, like democracy in Eastern Germany. HPG is the main militia of the PKK, or KCK in this case, and they have a direct command structure down to the YPG. So Maslom Abdi, the general of the YPG, reports to the main force, which is called HPG. What is the HPG doing? Their theater of operation is Turkey. And you could try to separate them, but there's an exchange of cadre, there's an exchange of expertise, there's an exchange of, rotations. It's stuck now a little bit, but basically they are one organization. I'm very bad, I have forgotten the women organizations, but they have their own organization, but they're parallel. So there's Ishastar on the level of the whole organization, and YPG on the level in Syria. And they replicate this in Iraq, and they replicate this for Iran, and so on. And you would have a political party, that's the PYD, the Democratic Party, and both in one way or the other report to the party conference in Kandil Mountain in Iraq, where all the structures are. So, the project of Rojava was long. Rojava is this northern Syrian area. There was an older plan to unite the strongholds of the PKK, wherever they are, to the detriment and against the interest of the Iraqi Kurds under the leadership of Barzani. This was always in the plans. This was always a PKK plan. Because they are arch enemies, they hate each other, they fight each other. And Öcalan wrote in 2005 a constitution for all Kurds, basically where he claims leadership for all Kurds. And all smaller, or all nation states, or all Kurdish organizations in nation states wrote their own constitutions. It's always on the same level. There's a democratic assembly, which is controlled on key issues by PKK members. They allow other political parties, provided they behave, to be active. They don't allow, for instance, in Syria, the Barzanis to be active. And all security-related institutions are under control by the YPG. However, the whole project, which is a very, very simple to understand communist People's Front project, the whole project runs under the banner of anti-fascism and gained legitimacy in its fight against ISIS. We have here a talent of the PKK, which also was foreseen by Öcalan in his papers around 2005 to build alliances. And we would have here three core elements among the Kurdish groups. The Jabhat al-Krat, the smaller one beyond there, is an allied force, more fundamentalist Kurds. The Shams al-Shimal are Kurds and Turkmens, and we have three different Arab brigades also, but this is based on long negotiations and a working alliance. This whole alliance, this setup of military forces, has been supported by the US and renamed Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, the Western reading is that the US came into the desert and told them, be nice, let's fight ISIS together. This would never have had a chance if there had been indigenous plans based on a strategy derived from an ideology beforehand. So the American success in building up the SDF is also the PKK's success in making alliances. Recruitment and propaganda in Europe, and this is where it becomes interesting. In 2014, when the Battle of Kobani raged, a second battle raged in Iraq, and that was the Battle of Baghdad. So it was the Western media then which elevated the Battle of Kobani to a very high degree and lauded it as a showcase example in fighting ISIS. Then this also allowed that the BBC and other Western media unisono took over the whole propaganda of the PKK and broadcasted it, reformulated in English. This had an impact on the re-emerging left-wing current on the universities. By this I mean the third worldist, the tiers-mondialist or third worldish currents like the Zapatista and the sympathizers with, for them, so that very soon volunteers joined the Kurds. Here we have the first example of how hybrid warfare works. Actually, it was only the PKK, but both the Barzanis and the Kandil leadership, PKK, preferred the terminology Kurds fighting ISIS in order to gain legitimacy, and especially the Barzanis had the reason to allow this framing, even if the arch enemy of the PKK would lose, because, how should I say, there's but the Barzanis have been very reluctant to fight ISIS seriously in the critical phase. Later on they did, but not that serious they could, because they know this organization very well. Again, when you break down it from the organizational level to the tribal level, you would see. Now, what came in from Europe and from the US was an international volunteer force. The first ones were American and British ex-soldiers, but more and more came in. And so came people from Turkey. And they created 3 outlets to organize them. One is called EUT, the Internationalist Freedom Brigade. One is called the Unified Revolutionary Movement, and one is called the United Freedom Forces. The cross sect and they are cross-fertilizing themselves, and they are also exchanging fighters and expertise. There's a difference, though. The HBDH movement, which I mentioned here, was founded by the Kandil leadership with the political narrative focus on the Alevites of Turkey and with the aim to do attacks inside Turkey, which they do until this day. Sometimes they get an army officer killed, sometimes they just blow something up. But this is about reorganizing the left-wing structure and the rest of the urban guerrilla inside Turkey, and focus them towards the strategic aims and wishes of the military leadership of the PKK. IOT, the third format, had another aim. They were founded by the YPG in Syria in order to do the necessary security checks for all these incoming volunteers and to allow them to form battalions. So whatever communist and separatist groups from France and Spain would come, or even Britain, they had to be there. And they are centered on left-wing extremist groups who see clearly the Rojava revolution as a part of a global urban revolution. And if one knows Turkish, the literature of the Turkish urban guerrilla, they already see a huge battleground from the urban centers in Turkey to the urban centers of Europe. Very shortly, the US, the decision of the US to go with the YPG is for many reasons problematic. First, it's cynical. It's cynical. You don't have any other ally, so you go for the only one who can deliver. This pragmatism is therefore cynical because it's dealt with from the perspective, what do we gain from it? But they totally ignore the motivations on the ground. And secondly, the ideologies are irreconcilable. All the PKK universe, all the writing of Öcalan is anti-imperialist, anti-American, anti-Zionist. So you elevate these people because you need them. And they know, they say, yes, if you want to fight ISIS fascism, as they call it, you need progressive communist forces, you need us. And the bourgeoisie, sooner or later, will realize that. The CIA has already grasped it, that they have to give us arms. We know that 2014 was also changed also the equation inside Turkey, because the peace process between Turkey and the PKK came to a halt and then failed. And actually the Americans were hoping that they could reconcile KDP and PKK, making them very tolerant and cooperative force, and you would support this by supporting the peace process inside Turkey. This was an illusion, but it worked for a few moments in Kobane, in the so-called heroic battle of Kobane. And yeah, that's number from 2015. I'm terribly looking always for new numbers, but it's almost impossible to get serious numbers. Yeah, and these are the pictures which were infuriating the Turks so much. The YPG and all guerrilla movements in the Middle East are learning institutions, and they are quick learners. They are committed, they don't waste time. The trainers, the American trainers, were only frustrated because at 15 hours sharp, everyone has to stop, everyone who has a gun has to stop and read pages of Abdullah Öcalan's works, period. This is dealing, they are on one mission. They know what to speak, they know what to say, they know how to say the same thing in 100 words, but they are committed. This is an absolute ideological steel force, and they impress already the Americans. They are clear, yeah, they are communists, they have their leader and so on, but these are the people to go to, because contrary to the Peshmerga, they really can fight. And we see some of the story of the women fighters is, of course, that was a given. They exist since the 1980s, but the media campaign around them, their films, even in the Volkstheater there was a play about it, is extremely successful and supports a certain, and is claimed by the gender debate inside Europe as one proof of how important this is. And these mortars, mounted mortars, are quite a little bit more than just a little bit infantry and a little bit guerrilla, because it also includes the guiding systems, and this is actually our fear. The YPG knows how to deal, meanwhile, with complicated electronic battlefield devices. They know it already, they have learned it, they've been trained. Now look at the internationalists. These are Europeans. That's one of these battalions I've mentioned. Look at the iconography. It's the Zapatista iconography. They have good relations with the Zapatista. They exchange. They do this in Vienna, by the way. The Zapatista were here a year ago and had a conference together with the PKK, and therefore Vienna is a progressive city. TKPML, that's one of the Maoist groups from Turkey, very aggressive, very strong in the west of Austria, very strong in southern Bavaria and so on. That's only one. People from Third World know this picture. I think it's South American, but the point they make is it's a global movement. And this is how the FARC, this is how the Naxalites in India and so on see it. This is one of the international brigades. Very clear, we serve, the international movement serves the Spearhead movement as represented by Abdullah Öcalan. Here in Ireland, Derry, with the real IRA, things to come. These are Breton and Sardinian anarchists and separatists. This is the group from Barcelona. And this is Berlin, the Berlin Antifa. So the military cooperation from a YPG point is very good. And what they want to do is to get, because they control already the media space in Europe, to get delisted enough pressure so that they get rid of the terror list and become legal. The PKK in Europe in general has, not under the name PKK, under other names, excellent autonomous underground structures. Parallel state institutions has a very, very, very strong influence on who writes what about the Kurds. So most scholars, especially those of political science, are at the same time political activists speaking the gospel of the PKK. So I found almost no one. I think we are two who are a little bit contradicting them, but it's extremely strong, and they are very well connected to mainstream political forces. I'm not talking about the fringe. The fringe groups, the extremist groups, like Sozialistische Linkspartei, or in Vienna the group Wende, and all these others, which hardly anyone ever had heard of, they are dealt with by the Turkish, mostly Maoist groups. This was the case in Favoriten we had 2 years ago where these riots were. The PKK wouldn't do this. The PKK wants to be in the center of the city, wants to be respected, and wants to have a handshake with the president. And of course, there must be, it's no point to deny it any longer, there must be some kind of deals of certain security services with, or other groups with the PKK, the contents of which we don't know. And by getting delisted from the terrorists, at the same time, and this is what happened now to me, they try to keep the control over their constituencies. So everyone who's Kurdish or left-wing should first think what would Öcalan say, or what is the party line, formally or informally, and to get through it. So the way how we talk about the region sometimes is one-to-one from the positions they have been formulating in their policy papers. And by their constituency, and I have to stress this more and more, this includes taxation, this includes contact to official documents, so they expect their members, when they got successful as business people, there was just a case of a very famous German firm, to cooperate with the organization, to finance them, to pay taxes. Many do voluntarily. If you don't do it voluntarily, you get your lessons. And they also expect, and this is now because so many of the rank and file members or the sympathizers are citizens of the European states already, even in the second generation, so they speak the languages. So they expect them, when you rise through the ranks as an official, you're going to work for us. You're going to make things possible. And the first aim are the universities, so that you can pass at least the language classes and to get the certificates quickly signed for Kurdish students who are then activists. And the final point of this very successful organization, and very much liked organization in this city, is that they also are one of the few capable forces to put taxation on the Kurdish drug cartels. So the heroin dealers and so on have to pay for them too. That's efficiency. Turkey does the same thing. Turkey does the same thing. I will not go because I've burned my mouth too much with an article I wrote a few years ago about Turkey as a narco-state. And the Turkish mafia had some unpleasant encounters with states, with officials in my country, which I did never think that this is possible. But anyway, Turkey has a natural strong constituency in Western Europe. Basically, most mainstream Anatolians and Thracians who are here. But they are reorganized how to deal with them under Erdogan. And this is one of the great points, because for the first time, Turkish citizens living abroad had the feeling that the embassy is indeed their embassy, there to serve them. Under the Kemalist days, they were looked down because they were just working class, but now things changed. And they called this, I wrote it wrongly here because I could not write Turkish with this program. I have forgotten to load up the fonts. It's called Yurt Dışı Türkler ve Akraba Topluluklar Başkanlığı. So it is the presidency for Turks living abroad and related societies, meaning both religious societies and ethnic groups. So the aim is to make Turkish leadership professionally and intellectually acceptable for all the Chechens, for the Bosnians, the Albanians, the Sunni Muslim community in general, and there, especially within the Arabs, with those who come from the Muslim Brotherhood tradition. They also very delicately and very diligently keep their own contacts to Turks in official positions in Europe, mostly over the cultural side. And they use campaigning in favor of, say, Erdogan's politics towards Syria or other places. In general, the presidency is still a very professional body, and more of the political activities go to volunteer organizations, some of them semi-criminal, like the Reisol Çakları or the Alperen Ocakları. These are organizations of far right-wing Turkish groups, and more to the AKP leadership. So we see now, since the last month, we saw it also in Austria, that there are direct contacts to high rank or to citizens of Turkish extraction that are in high places, who have direct contacts to the AKP party and connect directly and influence, therefore, the politicians over here. The Turks have a very clear understanding of political arithmetics. They know exactly where the Turkish vote counts in European elections. They know this exactly from district to district. And they are very careful. They are not very aggressive pushing, but they have some guidelines, and they are colorblind. They are not supporting one party over the other, but judge them how many citizens of Turkish descent you allow to rise in the ranks, or friends of Turkey to rise in your own administration. So, and this is the new normal. In the EU, Turkey and the PKK sidelined any actor. It's almost now, when you talk about the Turkish community, this was not this way years ago. You're either pro-Erdogan or anti-Erdogan. When you're from the Kurdish side, you're either pro-Öcalan or anti-Öcalan, but then you have to say nothing. This goes very deep. It affects your relationships when, say, restaurant owners are singled out that they are on the wrong side. Nobody would go there, or nobody would help, and so on. And these groups are the strongest to fight about the interpretation of events and narratives happening in Turkey and affecting Europe. And this is, I would say, right now there is a draw, because the PKK is quite content with the strong presence on the universities, which is quite strange when you really meet the core of the PKK. They are not academic at all, absolutely not. There's just a word of Öcalan and nothing else. But they are very popular within the academia, the left-wing chic, both the gauche caviar, so the champagne left, and the radical left. And they know the dog very well. Whereas Turkey has numbers, has the presence, and has also the economic clout, and will always remain for a state a more interesting partner. And one example was in the same interview I gave, Mr. Heusgen, who is now the head of the Munich Security Conference, said that the aim of Germany is not to have, because of its position towards both Turkey and the YPG in northern Syria, not to have any problems on German streets. Yes, but this basically means that you admit defeat already. I cannot do foreign policy because otherwise I have riots here at home. So therefore there is a no position. On one hand, this goes to a negative spiraling up. The stronger the PKK is perceived in the public scene, among the young people, and they are now very well connecting themselves with the gender issues and with the Fridays for Future, the Women's Day and so on, because there's an order of Öcalan to coordinate them and to get all the left-wing groups following Öcalan. At the same time, the policy towards Turkey gets more and more friendly because you need Turkey, and this will continue in this contradiction, which is basically a no policy. You just wait and see and bide your time. In the region, there's another new normal, the so-called irregulars, like proxies, militias, terrorists, or whatever you call them, are one of the main fighting forces. It's them more, and they are very good adapting and connecting with other regular forces. Iran and other countries do the same thing, but they do it differently. And so they are now the irregulars are now the regulars on the battlefield. And once you start sponsoring one group, you have a double binding. It's not only that you are sponsoring someone and believe that now they should kill this and that group, but they also bind you. You sponsor them and you have political problems. The US have political problems with Ankara exactly for these reasons, for better or worse. And I agree that, that one must not forget the YPG's contribution to fight ISIS, but and this is the other point, the Iranians better understood. The Iranians have groups who are 100% committed to the case of the revolutionary case of Iran. The Americans are sponsoring an anti-imperialist group, which is very, where the Americans think they guide them, but which very much looks as if the Turkish narrative is right, that they know exactly what they want, and they cooperate for a certain tactical and operational aim, but basically you're legitimating this organization, and that's their aim. And besides that, because we have strong ideological non-state actors, I think the US are beyond, in this peculiar relationship, the US are beyond the point where they simply can drop the YPG. They can't. It's over. They dream of it, because it is a kind of ridiculous to have US soldiers next to the Red Star and other paraphernalia of eternal communism, or, as you mentioned, talking about truth. When you talk with communists, there's this truth in the Red Star. But they can't. And if they did, or if any effort, as are going on now, has any chance to become more serious, it will be blood on the streets over here. And in order to prevent this, your governments have the tendency to do these organizations some favor. Oh, if they are now making a demonstration, how big will that be? 30,000, 100,000, 50,000? Let's start with the reasonable ones so that nothing gets destroyed, that we don't have street fighting and so on. And that's already ongoing. That's already ongoing, but the political level is ignoring it. Why? Because it's inconvenient. And living now under a media attack campaign from the PKK, I can imagine why politicians are a little bit shy. Besides, as I mentioned, the narrative on the Kurds is controlled by the PKK and by no one else. And how deep this goes into the system can be seen on here it is, on a decision of the workers' chamber in Vienna. Austria, as you know, has a very special system. The so-called Arbeiterkammer, the workers' chamber, doesn't exist as far as I know in any other country. It's a very powerful institution. It also has elected bodies. And in Vienna, we also have a very strong left-leaning majority there. And this is the final point where the PKK manages, via the Rojava narrative, to go into the political system of a democratic country. The declaration of the Workers' Chamber from autumn 2019 reads like that. Rojava is the symbol of a democracy from below. For a democracy in enterprises, and in economy. Rojava is therefore one of the few moments of history in which the question of a better world is culminated. The ideas for which the men and women in Rojava are fighting were already the ideas of the social democratic workers' councils in Vienna in the early 1920s. It are also the ideas for which social democrats, communists and anarchists and others fought in the international brigades in Spain from 1936 onwards. And also today, humans from Europe and Austria and the whole world fight for these ideas in Rojava, for a better world. So that is what I call a quite successful march through the institution for a banned organization. Thank you very much.
Dr. POSCH, thank you very much indeed. It's always fascinating to hear one of your lectures, and I was very fond of your three-part article on far-left Turkish extremism. It's really spectacular.
I forgot, I wrote something, I put it out there on the Kurdish issue, where I looked into the military operations in northern Iraq and in Syria, where I also touch upon the ideological problem of it. Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Questions, please keep them short. We're running on a very, very tight schedule here.
Thank you. Do you have some insights into what happened in Kazakhstan in the winter 2022?
Kazakhstan?
Yes, and the role of the Turkey. These rebels in Kazakhstan. There were rumors, there are some Islamists from Syria like that.
The core element is a Uyghur group in northern Syria. They are the flotsam of history because they started as a civil rights movement in China and got quite mistreated. And usually Turkey is very careful with the central relations and prefers to sell them at the next possible possibility. The Kazakhs are not very strong in the global Islamist movement. They are gaining ground. Political Islam is gaining ground in Kazakhstan, but I do not know in which element of this. You know, the Kazakhs are divided in three groups. The Orthodox, I don't speak Kazakh, but so I only got the Turkish translations. But they are not. Turkey playing a role there in Kazakhstan, I doubt it. I think the Kazakhs have the Turks quite under control. And coming to Islamists, much less than Uzbeks, much less than Azeris. and definitely much less than Uyghurs. So I don't see too much, but we are looking into this very carefully. However, there is someone in Baku, Jehangir Araslı, who really knows up down to the last person who from the former Soviet Union is fighting in Syria. But that's an entirely different story, and I ignored it because it's out of the focus of this hybrid dichotomy of how Turkey and the PKK exert hybrid influence over Europe.